Before World War II, very few welders were used on a farm, as a farmer could get a replacement part or take the broken piece down to the local repair shop and have it welded. During the war, parts and materials were scarce, so the machinery manufacturers could not replace a broken part, and the local welder had gone to work in the war plants, thus leaving the farmer on his own. Some of the farmers then started buying welders, and they generally bought what we call the industrial type welder, which was too large for average farm jobs. Also, some of them thought that they would get a large one so as to be able to do anything. After they got the welder, they started having trouble with electric service, and even burning out the transformers on the pole outside, which was no fault of the electric company, as the farmer should have consulted them. You know that transformers cost the electric company plenty of money. The agriculture engineering department and the power companies got together and ran several tests as to how big a machine a farmer could safely use and still do all the work he wanted to do. We used a 180 ampere limited input machine against a 300 ampere machine and did all the work required to do on a farm. The owner of the 300 ampere machine admitted he never used the full capacity of the machine, thus buying something he had no use for. There are several types of farm welders on the market now. A plain transformer type, which has taps in the secondary winding for different amperes needed, which has a variation of 15 amps, which gets by on average welding. But for special work, one is too cold and the next tap too hot. Another type of machine has a movable secondary coil, which gives you a range from 0 to full capacity of the machine, which is very good. This machine moves the secondary coil on the magnetic core of the primary winding, and closer to the primary coil the stronger the magnetic field is, thus giving you a higher output on the secondary winding and more current to weld with. Another type has a stationary secondary coil but has a control dial on front and has two taps on the front panel, one from 0 up to 90 amps and the second tap from 90 to 180 amps. This machine gives you from 0 to a full capacity of the machine and is also very good. Another type of welding machine has several controls on the front panel. On the right hand side, a switch for regular voltage and low voltage on your primary coil, which is very useful, as sometimes on the near end of the electric service line, when everybody in the line are using current, your voltage sometimes gets down to around 90 volts, thus giving you a low voltage on the input side of the welder, and therefore cutting down the output of the machine. This machine has a booster coil hooked in the secondary winding to give you a surge of current to help you in striking an arc. This is controlled by a switch on the front of the panel and can be shut off when welding thin metal. If you did not shut off the booster coil when welding thin metal, it would burn through the metal when striking an arc. Several of the farm welders made today have some device in the machine to give you a surge of current when striking the arc. This result is secured by use of a booster coil, capacitor, or a condenser. When buying a welder, get one from a local man who understands welding and can give you help in your welding problems. Also help you in selection of welding rods, as if you don't get the correct rod for the job you are doing, you will have a poor finished weld. Another thing to remember is always buy the welding rods recommended by the manufacturer of the machine, and you won't have much trouble after you have got used to striking an arc and can run an even bead. Another type of machine is a portable machine run by a gasoline engine. This machine you can get in various sizes and is very handy to take any place in time of trouble where you need a welding outfit. This machine also has an outlet, one that you can use for floodlights to show up your work at night, and is very handy in storms where bridges etc. have been weakened or washed out. When buying an electric welder, you should always get what is called a carbon arc torch with the outfit, so you can do brazing and etc., same as the oxygen acetylene torch, and also preheat castings before welding when needed. Hope this gives you some idea of what to buy in the farm welding for farm use.
Freezing as a means of preserving meat has demanded a change of cutting meat from the regular retail method. Surveys conducted by Mrs. Nancy Masterman in 1945 and 1946 have shown that New York State locker patrons are not satisfied with the one retail style of the locker owner or patron is concerned with the problem of saving storage space, maintaining a low processing charge, and obtaining the most desirable cuts a carcass is capable of producing. This problem cannot be easily solved with one method or style of cutting when we consider that the locker patrons have different preferences in regard to the number of oven roasts. Price they are willing to pay for a larger number of oven roasts and pot roasts than the any other. For low-grade boning, all cuts save storage space, but it is never a good or economical practice to bone and roll cuts into roasting. Such a procedure wastes modified to suit the patron's preferences to the proper balance between increased cost of boning and saving in locker space. 3 methods of meat cutting are being used to determine the most desirable method, the cheapest method, and an intermediate method which would be a combination of the other 2 methods. Although the experiment is not yet completed, preliminary results indicate that the method of cutting which demands the maximum boning and rolling produces the most desirable cuts. It saves more storage space, but due to the great amount of boning, requires longer cutting time. A second plan of cutting requires no rolling and a minimum amount of desirable cuts, requires more storage space, but decreases cutting time. Produces more desirable cuts, required with minimum boning, and permits a shorter cutting time. Cuts are boned. Regardless of which plan one selects in cutting meat for the freezer locker, one should consider the grade and quality of the meat, the amount of storage space available, and the total cutting time and processing cost. Removing the large bones such as the shank, the arm bone, the hip joint, and H-bone will greatly reduce attractive and easy. Kansas workers report a saving in storage space of almost 1 cubic foot by boning and rolling a wholesale chuck. However, boning increases the cutting time, which makes the processing charge higher. In some cases, the value for the freezer should be selected to best suit the family's needs and preferences if they are going to make maximum use of the freezer and the meat supply at a reasonable cost.
The 1948 growing and planting season is about finished. Some small acreages of wheat will still be planted, I suppose, but all in all, most of the farming equipment is in the shed for the winter. Since the rush of work is about over, we have a little spare time in which to think about next year's work. What varieties of corn and oats to plant, what seeding mixtures to use, what grade and quantity of fertilizers to buy. Today I want to talk about fertilizers. Crops are able to grow and produce good yields if certain conditions are satisfactory. One very important condition is a good supply of available plant nutrients. Most of our soils have large quantities of some of the mineral nutrients, but only very small amounts are in a form that plants can use during the growing season. We apply fertilizer for the purpose of increasing the quantities of available nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, so that we can get good yields of small grains, corn, and forage crops. Many farmers are using fertilizers in satisfactory quantities, but many more would profit by using them too. It is one of my duties at present to make fertilizer recommendations as a result of tests made on soil samples sent in to us by the county agents. Results show that there must be some other reason than lack of nutrients for poor crop yields. However, most show that farmers just have not used manure in the past. The fertility level is so low that it is impossible to produce good crop yields. These poor yielding soils in many cases are not hopeless, but a wise use of lime, fertilizers, manure, and legumes will be needed to bring them back into good. If you have been following a good fertilizer program, you will have a good idea what you will need next year. I would urge that you order the highest grade possible, however. The lower grades may be less per ton, but the actual nutrients cost you more than in a higher analysis fertilizer. If you need some help with your fertilizer program, your agent. It may be you don't know him, even though you are a Farm Bureau member, but I suggest you get acquainted with him and discuss our fertilizer recommendations as they apply to your soil. You can do this within the next few weeks and get your fertilizer order in early enough so that you will have a good chance of getting it next year. We know that it has been difficult to get some of the ingredients of fertilizers, so that some grades are difficult to prepare. This is especially true with nitrogen, so that some of the grades cannot be made. A discussion of the available grades with your county agent and fertilizer dealer will help you get the highest possible grade to be sold this next season. There isn't any shortage of superphosphate, however, and I believe, with the exception of lime, superphosphate is the most needed fertilizer on New York farms. If you are planning some improved pastures or meadows for next year, don't neglect this superphosphate. Use it liberally in the barn to reinforce the manure and when you put down the new meadow or pasture seeding. 1 1/2 pounds of 20% superphosphate per cow per day in the gutter is our recommendation for barn use, and 400 to 600 pounds per acre for a new seeding. Ordering your superphosphate early makes it certain that you will get it on time. This goes for 02020, 816-8,